To raven whisper, north winds cry, where truth is hidden in the sky. Through 9 realms wide and time grown cold, we seek the wisdom of the old. With axe and shield, with heart unbent, for honor's call our fate is set. We rise as one beneath the storm. To raven whisper, we are sworn.
Welcome to Ravens Whispers Across the Nine Realms. I'm your host, Mark Peterson, along with Chris Allen, who is a co host. And today with us, we also have Brandon, who is going to be one of our guests for today's episode, which is titled PTSD Isn't Just a War. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
It's another one of those days, man.
Yes. So we have really hit the ground running with these episodes this season. It's just been an amazing season so far, and I think that today's episode is going to be really good as well. We do have two former, I'm going to say, we have veterans. I can't say former because we got a Marine in here as well. But we do have veterans on this episode. Christopher Allen is retired, and Brandon Carson is veteran from the Marines. So, I think that this episode is really going to be good because we're not just going to talk about the veteran side. We're going to talk about domestic trauma, all that kind of stuff that comes with PTSD, because PTSD, you just don't get it. It's something that a trauma that happens in your life where you constantly relive, and childhood, whatever it may be. There's a lot of misconceptions about PTSD, and I think that we're going to really talk about a lot of that today. So, without further ado, I guess my first question would be, I'll pick on Chris first. Being, I believe you're an MP in the army, and I'm pretty sure you saw a lot of shit. When you were in there. How did you manage your own self, during, those traumas, during those disasters, during whatever happened in your path?
Well, just like you said, I mean, PTSD is not a singular event. And when people come into the service, they don't come into the service as blank slates, right? So, there's childhood abuse that happens out there in the world, domestic violence, sexual assaults. So it's not just one thing that happens. And even with military service, obviously there could be a traumatic event, but that traumatic event, would affect you or Brandon or myself differently. So it's what happens in our lives, our experiences, our reactions to those experiences. And sometimes we get to the point where, think of layers, right? Layer of an onion or layers of paint. Eventually it gets to the point where it starts to disrupt how we act, with ourselves, with our family, with our friends. And so when you talk about, how did I manage it? Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you're not even thinking about managing it. You're just thinking about reacting to it, doing your job. In our role, typically we were deployed in hurricane or other natural disasters, in the state of South Carolina or our neighboring states. So in the moment, you could appear to be fine. You could appear to have everything under control. And then afterwards, as you decompress and you start to be able to internalize and process what's happening, it just adds another layer to it. And then you get to the point where you're thinking you're managing it, but then people around you might start seeing how you have changes in behavior around certain situations. I don't always feel like this, but some people are more triggered when they get into large crowds, especially if those crowds seem constraining, like if you're very close, either at a conference or at a get together or even at a family picnic. If there's just too much noise and commotion going on and you feel restricted, you might react differently. Sometimes it's just reacting by withdrawing. Sometimes it could present as anger or screaming or other ways to, the way I describe it, ways to protect yourself. And you're not even thinking about it a lot of times. So a lot goes into PTSD and how we react and how we deal with it on a daily basis. So for me, in the while it's happening, I'm not thinking about managing what's happening, but definitely afterwards, I want to, especially now. I mean, I'm much older now than I was whenever I first went into service. So I hopefully have matured a little bit. My wife might say something different, but for the most part, I think I've matured over the years. And I've connected. I'm not just always talking about resources. I use the same resources that I recommend everyone else, and not one type of resource, is going to help every single person, but find the type of resource that works for you. And then if that didn't work for you, find a different resource. So that's how I manage it.
So, would you say that a lot of your experience in the military has helped mold you into the individual that you are today, with wanting to help in the suicide prevention and wanting to be an advocate in that world? Do you think that your military career has helped you get into that path?
I didn't see that as I was in my career, but within the last 10 years, I can definitely tell how my prior experiences, the more I learn about mental health and suicide prevention, particularly in America, but even around the world, it does shape how I view suicide prevention. I don't look at suicide prevention just as responding when we're in crisis. That's typically how we think of suicide prevention. Somebody's in crisis, we talk about the signs and symptoms, and then we refer them to care, which is great and needed. But now, I'm more focused on how do we get ahead of it. We talk about words like upstream and primary prevention. So what does that mean? And as we're talking about, today and about this month of PTSD, since we know post-traumatic stress disorder, and some people don't say the disorder. Sometimes a lot of people now are saying, post-traumatic stress. What does that look like? How do we get ahead of something that's already, ingrained in our culture, and not just the military culture, just in our culture. You don't have to be in the military or be in combat to experience PTSD. So how do we get ahead of it? And so the way it shaped me now is, how far ahead can we get? Do we start talking to folks right when they enter service? Absolutely. Do we talk to them before they enter service? So that looks like, talking to high schools and maybe even middle schools. Do we talk to the treatment facilities where we live? Some places have wonderful in close proximity treatment services. Some places, a lot of places in America, are not close to those services. So it's definitely shaped how I look at PTSD, mental health as a whole. And really now I'm focused on, how far ahead can we get? And then I start focusing on that.
Right. Yeah. So, Brandon, I'll pick on you a little bit now. So, to the same question, um, how do you feel that, PTSD affected, or not in general, how do you feel that the military has affected your own mental well-being in this?
So and it's probably a lot of folks out there that probably feel the same way I do. Is when you're in, it doesn't seem like it affects you at all. It's a constant. We'll deal with it later. Mission first. Keep pushing forward. And I know some people they deal with it once they have some downtime. It hits them. I know for me, it took years after I was actually out before I even dealt with it. And that was after essentially putting myself in a corner and hitting rock bottom is before I even dealt with it. And I'm pretty sure there's plenty of us that have done or gone through the same thing at that point.
So, do you feel, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Chris, do you feel that any of your past experiences in the military have helped shaped the individual that you are today with wanting to help in mental health, wanting to help in suicide prevention, and wanting to kind of be an advocate in that?
It helps shape the kind of person I am, uh, how I approach things, how I do things, but I don't think it affected me as far as while in wanting to help with the suicide prevention and mental health world. That was after and realizing that there's many of us that go through the same things and trying to help them along that road too. Um, it's one of those things of a lot of us believe, to help a veteran, you have to be a veteran kind of thing. You understand that world, you understand where they're coming from. So you want to reach back and give that hand to help them go forward.
Okay. So we kind of, I kind of picked on you guys. So, now you guys get to pick on me and, ask me about mine. So
Okay, so
go
so
for
I'll
it.
I'll phrase a question for you, Mark. Um, so uh, part of PTSD is being hypervigilant, having flashbacks, getting to the point where certain sights and sounds, smells, other things are triggering. So what have you experienced or heard or seen that helps somebody regulate during those times of reaction?
So how do I see it, or how do I interpret it?
How do you interpret it?
So for flashbacks, for especially me, I had a trauma childhood. One of my best friends died in my arms. So, that's trauma right there, right? Um, when you are dealing with that kind of, know, stuff, I would say, you go and sometimes in the back of your mind, it's just like, you know, you hear all the negativity, you hear all of the voices that are saying it's your fault, it's your fault that this happened, you did this, For the longest time, I did feel like that, probably for about 5 years, and during those 5 years, those really intense 5 years, there were two attempts of my own life, and my process of the flashbacks was just a very I wasn't able to sleep. Um, every time I try to sleep, I'd have a night terror, or there'd be something that just crept up in the background. I still have those from time to time, but it's not like it used to be. And the flashbacks or the sounds, every time it's never changed. Every time I hear the chirp of a ambulance, I go back. And that's something that is ingrained, I believe, and I think that's part of my trauma. That trauma just doesn't go away, and I know that there's a lot of things out there, and there's a lot of, I call it stigma on, oh, you're just gonna get over it. You're just it's gonna be okay. You can just move on. The one thing that you don't tell somebody with PTSD is, oh, it's just gonna be okay, and you're gonna be fine, and you're that's not what you tell somebody, especially when somebody is going through an episode, or they're going through one of the things that still happens to me to this day is I will be doing something, or I'll be walking, or I don't know, but I'll just stop. And it's a blind stare. Like, I literally lose sight from reality for probably like 6 minutes. Then I come back and it's just like, are you okay? I'm like, no, I just had something happen. So being able to talk like that, I think when you do have a trauma, or you do have CPTSD, PTSD, any of those signs that you're able to do, anxiety, panic attacks, as long as you're able to know that you have those, I think that you'd be okay. And I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you did. And just one step further from that. So, what grounding techniques do you use once you recognize something's happening? What keeps you grounded? What has helped
So
you?
my music is what keeps me grounded. My wife keeps me grounded, and my I don't want to call them happy thoughts, but like my thoughts of this life is amazing. Instead of always feeling that, you know, when you do go through your PTSD, then you get in depression and you get into these modes, and sometimes you can't get out of those modes. I'm able to get out of those modes because of my grounding techniques. You know, I love my life, right? Even though there are times where my brain is telling me chemically, "Oh, you don't work. Oh, you're not worth anything, right?" I still get up from this day to this day, and I look in that mirror every morning, and sometimes my brain is just like, "You're never going to amount to anything." You hear those thoughts, and you're just like, "Yeah, shut up." But some people can't do that, and that's where there's a lot of misconceptions about PTSD in general, and or depression, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, right? Um, because it can look PTSD can look a lot like you know anxiety. Um, it can look like panic attacks. It can look like flashback. Like, there's so many different things that it can look like. Uh, I think one of the big things for the veteran side of all that too is feeling the survivor's guilt, or actual dealing with what you have to deal with, or if you lose a comrade, or if you lose somebody. I think that does some harm.
Yep. So, I'll turn the question to Brandon. What grounding techniques have worked for you?
Oh, that has been a difficult journey for me. I'm not gonna lie.
Right. Right.
Music has been a huge one. Even before I went in service, music was a huge part of my life, so that has been a huge help. And honestly, I've gotten to the point now in life, as you said, like you get older, you tend to mature sometimes. I mean, I'm pretty sure our spouses say otherwise, but you just have to kind of start talking to yourself in your head, trying to be like, I'm better than this, and I can move through this. This is just another obstacle in my path, and we're going to keep moving forward.
Yep. And to be fair, so I'll turn the question on myself. A lot of what you two were saying sounded to me, like, connection, connecting with what's happening with you, and then connecting, your own thoughts and recognizing them for what they are. And even though I was, talking earlier about, sometimes whenever I get around a lot of people, I do feel kind of closed in. But on the flip side of that, it's also the connection with other people that keeps me grounded. It's I do consider myself, an extrovert, but there is a limit, right? And so I do have to pull away and, find some quiet time. But it's that connection with family, with my wife, of almost 35 years, our children, even our fur babies. We only, we just have one fur baby right now, Jessa, little long haired Chihuahua. But sometimes when she just comes up and just lays down next to me, she's not a trained service dog or anything like that, but I do feel in my experience that, the animals that we choose to bring into our family, can feel and sense, what's going on. So it's, for me, the word is connection, connecting with friends, connecting with family. I say being open and honest, about what's going on, but sometimes you have to pick and choose, who you really open up to. So sometimes whenever I'm connecting with someone, I don't really have to tell them what's going on. And we're just having a conversation, and they may not think anything of it, but I'm using it, and maybe even that friendship, as a way to stay grounded, whether they know what's really happening with me or not. So I use connection as a way to kind of de-escalate the situation. Turn back over to Mark.
Yeah, so it seems like that we kind of have our stuff figured out, right? How we do it sometimes, not all the time.
Yep.
There are other days where definitely thoughts of wanting to murder somebody just because they turned left or they cut you off. There's just those kinds of things that still happen. But I guess I kind of want to jump into the common misconceptions about PTSD. So I feel that one of the biggest misconcepts, just I'm a civilian, right? I'm not, I was a military brat, but I know a lot. But I think that the misconception that I hear a lot is that PTSD only affects service members and first responders. And I think that right there is the stigma with PTS, the letters PTSD, that are always out there, because I believe everybody that I come in contact with has some type of disability. And I believe that because of how our world is. I believe that because humans don't trust humans usually. They trust their animals more than they trust another person. And one of the things that I know TROA is really doing as an organization is helping humanity. That is one of our goals is to help humanity. Whether it be talking to somebody, whether it be welcoming somebody, whether it be doing all that, right? And I'm getting to the point of what I'm saying. When you sit in the Discord server, right? If you have Discord out there, that people are listening, definitely, you possibly know what I'm talking about. You're sitting there and you're minding your own business, and then all of a sudden, somebody joins the channel and they start talking about their day, and you're like, dude, I'm trying to play a game, right? That's what most people will do. Not in TROA. We embrace it. oh, okay, so what is going on? And then you start hearing about, well, my dog died, or, something happened, or it 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 people just open up online is what I'm getting at. And what ends up happening is you hear all these different people talking about their problems, right? They're not their problems, but they're the issues that they're dealing with in life. And they then start telling you, "Oh, I have PTSD, or I have CPTSD, or I have anxiety, or I have depression, or I have, all these different things." And the first thing that I've always, thought about is okay, well, I mean, how can we help you? The first thing that I never say, and that I always hear people say, "Oh, did you serve in the, or did you serve? Are you a first responder?" And I think that that's where the misconception question was going with me is it's just, I think that's so asinine to think, to even have that thought process that PTSD is just specifically for service members and first responders. I think that the
Well,
reason that it I think that
yeah.
the reason that it does hit to that point is because we know what happens in war, right? We know what happens in war. We know what happens when you're going as a first responder onto a scene. That definitely does qualify, but I think, and I'll let you go after this. I think that now is the time where people need to realize that the world is broken. People are broken since COVID, and we talked about this in episode, before. COVID destroyed a lot of things in this world, and it destroyed a lot of people. It destroyed a lot of things, and it made people change their mindset on some things as well. But I digress. Go ahead.
No, no, you're good. And I just wanted to bring out, we were talking, about what leads, up to PTSD. And, I can really only speak from my experience, but I've also seen experiences with other folks, you know, before, especially, you know, whether it's before military or I'll call it pre-adulthood, right? So whenever you're a child and you're being raised, by your family and your community around you, um, and there's abuse in the picture by people that you trust, whether it's your immediate family or extended family or friends. As a child, you don't know that that's not normal. You think that is normal. You think, or I used to think that, what was happening um, with me was happening, in every family, in every place you go. And it wasn't until, when you leave your parents, household and you go out into the world, whether it's the military or college or, employment somewhere, and you start to see what's happening in other households that you realize, it wasn't normal, how I was raised. And connecting it to the military, sometimes you see things in the military that when you're first brand new in the military, you think everything you're seeing and everything people are doing is normal. Even the abuse, whether it's hazing, whether it's you know being inducted into certain aspects of the military, or to include sexual assaults, as a child or as an adult. you know you have to, I don't say you have to, sometimes you get to the point where you don't even realize that you're traumatized and the experience that has been with you until you can give it a reference point. And whether that's observing what's happening with other friends of yours, whether it's talking to fellow veterans, whether it's going to a therapist, whether it's going to your chaplain, whoever you do trust, and then you see what right looks like, and then you can start to piece together this puzzle. I'm going to call it the PTSD puzzle, but you start putting together this puzzle, what happened to you, how you're reacting to it, and how it's affecting your relationships with those that you either work with or go to school with, or, you know, people that you love, your family and friends around you. When you start putting all those pieces together and you realize, you know, I'm trying to say it without using the word damage, but for me, I mean, I felt, you know, damaged. I felt, you know, that I was less than. And then you start to have to unpack that and find ways to, and I think that's the one of the misconceptions is you could have PTSD, and because you've never heard the term, because you've never, you know, talked to a therapist or talked to anybody about what's going on, you could be one of the walking wounded out there in the world and not know what all of this experience that you've had growing up and experience that you've had, you know, either at college or in the military, and how it's all layered up to the point where, you know, you have, you know, you to where you can eventually be diagnosed with PTSD. And it's not just the diagnosis, in my opinion, is just the starting point. You know, once you can identify what's happening, then it's unpacking it and getting to what, you know, I know we use this word, maybe we use it, maybe we overuse it in our society, but really to a new normal. Because once I got married and we started having children ourselves, I had no choice. I mean, I guess I had a choice, but the cycle had to stop with our family. And so I had to get to a point where I could have a loving relationship with my wife, where I could have a loving relationship with our children, and not treat them how I was treated and what I saw, how people were treated as I was growing up. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that people don't understand about PTSD is, you know, the folks that have PTSD, one, don't know it. And two, to your point, you know, it's not, in fact, I think a lot of times it's really not connected to combat, because the folks in the military that actually get into, I'm going to say, eyeball to eyeball combat is a very small percentage, actually. And so with PTSD, mental health, suicidal ideations, and completed suicides, that's a human condition. It's not just about combat. It's if you're a human and you've experienced certain things in your life and and it's affecting how you're able to conduct your life, you know, that is what, in my opinion, brings the realization of PTSD out. And so, and I hear what you were saying earlier, you know, a lot of people, you know, if somebody says, you know, I have PTSD or PTS, or I'm a survivor of PTS or PTSD, a lot of times people do say, you know, have you served in the military? You know, have you been a first responder? Because they want to put in context what you're telling them. And what some people, I think, are in denial about is, yes, we can do horrible things to each other in combat, but we do horrible things to each other, you know, in the walls of our own home, as we are raised and as we grow and as we interact with other humans. And that is, I feel, the dark side of PTSD, that it's just hard for people sometimes to be able to come to grips with what the diagnosis of PTSD is. And it's different for every single person. You know, there's millions of people diagnosed, and there's millions of different stories of what got them to the point where they were diagnosed with PTSD, in my opinion.
All right. Go ahead, Brandon.
Also, like, I mean, lots of great points. I'd also like to say that it's also easy to attribute PTSD, CPTSD to combat, because people think of all the traumatic events that can happen. So it's very easy to correlate the two together. But you're right. I mean, even later in life, it's not something that you can just not have. It's, you can pick that up as your life experiences going on. I know I've worked with several individuals that never served, really didn't have traumatic childhoods, but the things they went through as adults, uh, being in abusive relationships, being attacked while at work, those kinds of things also can create those situations. And I don't think there's enough education out there to really kind of point people in that direction of these things can still happen.
So I'm glad you mentioned education, Brandon. So I have a question. So in your opinion, what's the most important thing people, either if they have a family member or a friend or coworker or any acquaintance that they know that has PTSD, or whether they know it or not know it, what's the best way folks around them can support the person that's been diagnosed with PTSD, in your opinion?
It depends on the person. You have to approach everybody differently depending. Like, I know I'm particularly introverted, so I'm perfectly fine if you just let me to my own devices and set me in a corner. I'm good. But I have some people that they like to be in that group. Like, they have to be in that group or they will fall apart. Or even call. I've been called at 2 o'clock in the morning because they were awake and they couldn't sleep, and their brain wouldn't shut up because that's the things that they went through are running through their head, and they just have to have that talk with somebody. So everybody's different. There's no one approach fits all for that.
Well, so you're talking about talking. So what would be some words or statements that you would recommend people would stop using?
Oh man. Oh, it's all right. He'll get better over time. It really, I mean, the effects may lessen over time, but that's still there. That's one of the huge ones I hear on a regular basis. It's like, oh, it'll go away over time. It's fine. It'll heal. Maybe the effects, but that wound's still there. It doesn't go away.
Yeah. So Mark, what are some, you talked a little bit about it earlier, but what are some words or phrases that you feel we just need to stop saying as a culture around PTSD?
Get over it.
Yeah.
You're going to get past it. I think the one that I've had my exes tell me, my 2 ex-wives, was get over it, grow up. I can't tell you how infuriating hearing those words for me is. If I hear somebody tell somebody that, I immediately do step in and I'm like, don't talk to that. Don't talk to them like that. You have no idea what they're living. You have no idea what their story is. All that you know is that you're just being an asshole. And you're being very, very disrespectful to this person because you don't know them. I've said that to random strangers before because that is how I interpret wow, the word get over it. It kind of does tick my PTSD up, and it does tick me, and it does make me go into that flight or flight mode. And I'm just like, who the hell do you think you are talking to me like that? Because you're not going to talk to me like that, and I don't expect you to be talking. I literally, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago. I was at the airport actually, and there was a veteran that was having he was he was definitely having something going on, and there was this woman that was next to him, and I'm pretty sure she was a Karen, honestly. And I don't know what started the conversation. All that I remember was is the lady literally told this veteran who was going through something, Can you just get over it? You're making me feel very uncomfortable." I immediately stepped in and I said, "Ma'am, who are you and why are you talking to this person like that?" And in the back of my mind, I'm like, "Why am I doing this?" But I did it because he wasn't able to speak. He wasn't able to say anything because he was going through either a flashback or there was something going on with him that was making, I guess, her feel uncomfortable. I don't know. But what I do know is I will not put up with, and I don't think anybody should put up with, especially our listeners right now. Don't ever let somebody talk to somebody like that, because it it is a complete disrespect to that individual if you have a Karen or you have someone that just says those words can be daggers that are stabbing that individual, and that can make somebody go off the cliff. That can make somebody go into a suicidal depression. And there's a whole bunch of other things that can happen when you say those words. And I think that's one of the misconceptions with a lot of individuals that think that PTSD isn't a war. It is a war. It is a war inside your own mind that you're constantly thinking about, you're constantly worried about. And, kind of what you guys just were talking about with veterans and, those who serve in actual combat. Well, I've had friends, I was going to go in the military, but I didn't because my mom got sick. And I've lost probably 10 or 12 friends, in the service. One of them was an oil tanker. He came back, he was fine. 3, 4 months later, he takes his life, and this was before the Pentagon and the US government got really serious about, PTSD, and they got real serious about mental health in general. But that's another story for another day.
Yep. So to close out this thought, so I know I can be very judgmental sometimes. So I'm saying
Yes.
this, pointing the finger at myself that, we as a society need to do a better job of listening without judgment. Just being able to listen to somebody's story, as painful as it may be, um, letting them express themselves and let them feel like you're the type of person that can listen to what they're saying without passing judgment of them. Because I think that's what keeps a lot of people quiet is, the fear of being judged. But also just on this last note, healing is not linear. So, if how you can help somebody around you that has PTSD is realizing that whether the trauma happened yesterday, a month ago, or decades ago, does not equate to how recovered they need to be at this moment in time, according to the person listening to the story, right? So speak to briefly, and then we'll get on to the next topic about how healing from, because I do believe there is some growth and healing that can come from PTSD, but speak to why it's not a straight line from, diagnosis to healing and growth. Why is it not linear?
I think that it is not like that because each case is very, very different. You know, with a veteran, it's a lot different than it is with, someone that has childhood trauma, or it's a lot different if you see, I don't know, let's just say you're in the middle, you're walking and then there's somebody that walks across the street and they get struck by a bus and they get dismembered, right? There's all kinds of different things that can cause PTSD or can cause trauma. But I think the healing aspect is on the individual. If you're not willing to go to therapy, if you're not willing to do and take those steps, then I feel that individuals are going to be very. I don't think that it's going to fix anything, and I think that you can't just go from diagnosis to repair just like that, because it doesn't work like that. And I think that that's a misconception too. Oh, you went to therapy for a few years. No, I went to therapy for 5 years. I still go from time to time when I have bad things, but the the misconception right there is, oh well, you went to therapy, so you should be fine. No, I'm not fine, not at all.
Right. So Brandon, what are your thoughts about healing not being linear?
Not even close to linear.
Right.
More like a twisted ball of yarn. Because you can take all the steps necessary and you still have setbacks. You still hit those barriers that all that progress you made, it feels like it just went nowhere. So feels like you started back at zero all over again. Or you have periods where you feel like you are absolutely fine and something comes up and it sets you back again. It's never linear. It's all dependent on the individual. Therapy is great. The important part with therapy too is just because you're going doesn't mean that everything's going to be fixed, because you also have to pay attention to the fact of, is that therapist working for you? Just going there and talking to a brick wall that's sitting there as a therapist isn't going to help you.
Right.
Talking to a therapist that really is not paying attention to you and just giving you a canned answer is not going to help you. So finding the right therapist, if that's the route you want to take, is also incredibly important. Or progress really isn't going to go anywhere. You're going to be stuck in that spot.
So my last question. Go ahead, Mark.
That kind of sounds familiar, Christopher, from when we had the last podcast where we were talking about therapy.
Yep. So the last question I have is, and I'll start with Brandon, and then Mark, you can answer this afterwards. So what message would you share with someone who believes their trauma wasn't bad enough to justify asking for help? I'll start with Brandon, then Mark.
I want to say I was probably one of the kings of that statement. One of the biggest reasons why I never went for help, somebody had it worse. Somebody deserved that help more than me. So it took almost 10 years before I decided that I was actually going to sit down and get that help and realize, and that's after being, I call it bullied. I mean, essentially, it's folks that cared about me essentially sitting me down and be like, you need to get this help. I understand we can't force you to get the help, but you really need to go get the help. And, I was like, somebody has it worse than me. They deserve that time and energy more than I do. And they're like, no, so do you. So do it. It's worth it. Do it. No matter what. Even if
Brandon.
somebody has to drag you.
Yep. Perfect. Spot on. Mark?
So mine was forced. I didn't have a choice. So, you know, I was what you call attachment disordered from my family, and I had to go. I had a lot of therapy I had to go, and that was all forced. When I turned 18 or 19, I don't remember what it was. It was when I made the choice that I was done with therapy for probably about 5 to 10 years, maybe. I don't remember because I think I started going back in my late 20s. Um, and it took me that long, and my life, oh my God, it wasn't what it is now. Um, you know, I was I was a bad egg. That's all I'm gonna say. Uh there was a lot of things that were going on that, you know, I probably shouldn't have been doing, and it was all due to I didn't care. Um then when I went back to therapy, or that's when I was like, oh, okay, I probably shouldn't have been doing that, probably shouldn't have been doing that, you know. Um but I think it is up to the individual that they need to take that step. And if you don't take that step, then you're just not you're gonna be miserable.
Yeah, exactly. What both of you said. And, you know, what I tell people is, you know, you can't compare your trauma to somebody else's, because what might be very traumatizing to you, I might think it's just a Tuesday, and the same is reverse. You know, my trauma to somebody else, you know, may not be significant, but it all that matters at the end of the day is, you know, how is that trauma affecting you? Don't let the thought in your own brain of, you know, it's a sign of weakness or overreaction, or even when people tell you that you're just overreacting, don't let that hinder you. uh, I'm hoping, let that be a sign that you value well-being. Whenever you come to the, when your brain calls you to, you know, say, hey, should I go get therapy, or should I talk to somebody about this, you know, whoever that may be, let that be your sign, that you want to, and your body and your mind want, you know, they want to take a step towards healing. So don't let, you know, the outsiders, you know, deter you from that. So Brandon, any final thoughts that you want to tell our listeners? You know, we've been talking about
Oh,
PTSD.
I got
Go
one
ahead.
more. I got
Go
one
ahead.
more topic, sir.
Okay. What's the topic, Mark?
Wow, what PTSD can look like?
What could it look like, Mark?
Look like a lot of stuff. It could look like flashbacks, intrusive, thoughts, memories, nightmares, or night terrors, sleep disturbances, emotional numbness. It could look hypervigilant. So you're always looking on the out. Difficult with trusting others. That's a big one. That's a big one with a lot of individuals with PTSD. I know that for sure. I might be saying that's a stigma, but honestly, it is definitely true. Anxiety and panic attacks, irritability and anger, outbursts, avoiding certain people, places, or situations, difficulty concentrating, feelings of guilt, shame, or self blame.
Thank you for that, Mark.
What about you?
I appreciate that insight, that right from your own brain. The fact of
uh,
the matter is, that's right. What the list that you gave is exactly right. Um, I'm going to reserve my next comment for my closing comments, because I was going to speak to that, but I'm not going to say it right this second. I'm going to go back to Brandon and let Brandon give his closing thoughts about what we've been talking about today.
Honestly, it goes back to be honest with yourself. It's way easier said than done. It's
Right.
one of those things that you have to sit down and be like, this is a problem, and I'm gonna need to start trying to help myself. Smart said it. I mean, honestly, the longer you stay in that spot, the more miserable you're going to be, or feel like you're miserable. Maybe not actually being miserable, but mentally you're going to be feeling miserable. Um, so, yeah, take that to heart. Just be honest with yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon. All I was going to say, Mark, is that even though PTSD can manifest in several different ways, the truth of the matter is you can look at somebody, you know, if they had a broken arm, you would see a cast. You might see, you know, a splint or, you know, a wrap to keep it, you know, immobilized. But with PTSD, that type of injury, you're not going to see. You know, you may look at somebody and, you know, see a happy-go-lucky person, but again, I call them and myself walking wounded. You know, when they are carrying something, you don't see it right offhand. And so, what I would hope is that um, we take the lessons that we've learned. I've taken the lessons that I've learned through my 10 years of formal resiliency and suicide prevention training and mental health training to realize that if you treat each person as if they're going through something very serious and you treat them with compassion, most of the time, without you realizing it, they are. And whether they're experiencing it right at that moment or not, I don't know anybody on earth that cannot benefit from a compassionate person that's willing to listen to others without judgment. Um, when we talk about PTSD, you know, it definitely goes beyond combat. We recognize many forms of trauma. I've recognized many forms of trauma. Their experiences matter. Our experiences matter. Yours, Brandon, yours, Mark, myself. If anybody out there is listening and they feel that their pain does not matter, that their experience is not severe enough, please put that for a moment, put that thought aside and reach out. And if those thoughts are taking you to the point where you're thinking that your life doesn't matter, that you're thinking about dying by suicide, please stop right now and call 988 and speak to somebody who is willing to listen to you and willing to walk that path with you. So, and my final sentence is, with PTSD, recovery is possible.
Absolutely. It was well said, guys. So we're gonna go ahead and do
You're
the
muted.
closing. Oh fuck. As I said, that was really well put. And I agree 110%. You know, one of the things about Ravens Whispers, is as we get deep, we talk. We have these conversations to start the conversation of advocacy and to start the motors moving. Not all wars are fought with weapons. Some are fought in memories. Some are fought in silence. Some are fought every morning when a person chooses to get out of bed and face another day of wounds and the world cannot see. If tonight's conversation resonated with you, just remember this. Your trauma does not need to look like someone else's to be real. Your pain does not need permission to matter, and your healing does not need to happen on anyone else's timeline. Um, you know, the strongest people are not always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones quickly fighting battles nobody knows exist. And they're still trying to find the strength to move forward. Um, you know, all these stories, everything that we've talked about today, it's all about empowering and helping individuals. Every scar has a meaning, and every voice deserves to be heard. And, here goes our closing. That's one conversation and one whisper at a time. Thank you for joining us. And we will kick off episode 4 here in a few weeks. We're going to record it. So be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you, guys.
Shields in line, brothers, sisters, we bind with time, from hearth to hall, from field to fjord.